be agreed to. I call the Honourable Clayton Cosgrove.
Mr Speaker, the Labor opposition will be supporting this extension. It is a technical amendment, and we would be. Why are we supporting it? Well, quite clearly, why is because we in 2005 passed the Prisoners and Victims Claim Act whilst in government. This is a piece of Labor government legislation which the current government is seeking to extend for 2 years from 1 July 2010 until 30 June 2012. So on the basis of an extension of the legislation that the last government, the Labor government, passed, of course we would support this legislation. This legislation, sir, is designed to assist victims. The aim of this, of course, is to extend those restrictions on awarding compensation for a further 2 years, as I've said, and so that victims' claims process also applies to compensation awarded or to be paid pursuant to an out-of-court final settlement in respect of a prisoner's claim made on or after 1 July 2010 but before 1 July 2012. And so, in essence, this amending piece of legislation bridges a gap. Sir, we agree with this. We wrote this legislation, the Primary Act. We agree with its extension. But I would make a couple of points in passing, sir. This government has made much and many lofty claims in respect of assisting victims. And I suspect, putting aside our sort of political prejudices, that we all support that ethos of supporting victims who have been subject to either heinous crime at the horrific, tragic end of the scale, or even so-called minor crime or smaller incidences at the other end of the scale, sir. But I make this point. If this government was, sir, serious about assisting victims, this legislation would also be followed by legislation which does away with what is happening in ACC, where sexual abuse victims are no longer, sir, available to get the support they need under our ACC system, thanks to the changes made by this national government. Now, this, sir, is germane to this legislation because we are talking about victims of crime, and that member over there might have a bit of a peck, as she's wont to do. But the truth is this: I challenge this government, and I say, if they're serious about assisting victims, I ask every member of this government, what about those folks, the men and women who have been subject to horrific crime through sexual abuse and other sexual crime, that formerly under the previous government could get the assistance that they need? And there's no dispute, in my view, about the crimes committed against those people. They live with the horrific nature of those crimes for the rest of their life. They need, sir, counselling, perhaps psychological assistance, perhaps medical assistance and other support. And what we do know, sir, is that under the previous government, those victims of sexual abuse and sexual crime were getting the assistance they need. Under this government, many of them, most of them, are not getting that. And I challenge the ACT Party. Because, of course, we know the affiliation between the ACT Party and the Sensible Sentencing Trust through its former person, Mr Garrett, who was intimately involved with the Sensible Sentencing Trust. I challenge the ACT Party, Mr Boscawen, in this debate to get up and challenge the government that he and his colleagues props up every day, and ask them why it is, if that party is serious about assisting and supporting all victims of crime, I ask Mr Boscawen, sir, through you, will he get up and challenge this government and demand that they change their policy so victims of heinous sexual crime can get the assistance they need through ACC? Sorry? Oh, the defence sort of, the shell's been burst. So I challenge the ACT Party member, sir, to get up and challenge his own side in the debate. I challenge, sir, the Sensible Sentencing Trust, and I could be wrong, and I stand to be corrected, who have not at any time I've seen put out a statement decrying this government for its lack of support under the ACC system, for the change in the ACC policy, and the lack of support, sir, that victims of sexual abuse and sexual crime can receive. Thanks to this government, many of them, most of them, are not receiving that. And I challenge Mr McVicker, who has very strong views on the rights of victims, many which I agree with. I challenge him, sir, to perhaps put out a statement and decry this government for the withdrawal of service to those victims of sexual abuse, because I don't think, sir, that when we talk about victims, as I said, whether it be the top scale, the tragic circumstances of murder, of rape, of sexual abuse at the top end, the worst end of offending, that those victims are second class to any others. And whilst we support this legislation, there is a wider issue, sir, because in the crime of sexual abuse, those crimes have been dealt with. There is a guilty party. A jury, a judge has rendered a verdict, and somebody is in the clink or paying a price for abusing and violating some of our members of our community. So there's no dispute that the crime happened. Then the question is, what do we as a parliament, we as a community, we as a people, how responsible do we feel for aiding and assisting those victims of sexual crime? And I know there was a speech by Chester Burrows, I think, or if I'm wrong, I apologise. His colleagues sort of, oh, well, ACC, is it appropriate that they get help out of ACC? I say what is appropriate, sir, is that they get help, full stop. And the bickering, sir, over the pot it comes out of, if it is the case that this government feels that ACC is not the appropriate place for victims of heinous sexual abuse to be assisted, then I say to them, and I say to Mr Burrows, where is the replacement funding? Where is the funding for those victims to go to, whether it be in health or another government department or another government agency? Let's stop the bickering about whether it should be the ACC pot or another pot, whether it's deemed to be an accident under the definitional rules of ACC. If it is the government's judgment that ACC is not the appropriate place to help the victims of tragic and heinous sexual crime, then I challenge those members to tell us what they're doing about it, what they're replacing it with, and where is the resource that they're going to help these people. Because the Minister of ACC, sir, has been derelict in his duty, has been deficient in his job, and has not, as a member of our parliament, as a member of our community, stepped forward, made a case in the Cabinet. If he doesn't want these compensatory benefits to come out of his vote ACC, then he has a duty, and every member of the Cabinet and their caucus, sir, that bleats on, and those organisations and support parties like ACT, and those organisations outside this place like Sensible Sentencing and others that purport to stand by victims, and I take them at their word and I respect them for those views, they have a duty, sir, to hold this government and Cabinet to account and to demand that they provide the resource from some vote, from some agency, from some department to assist those men and women who live with the crime of sexual abuse, sir, for the rest of their lives. Many, sir, who I'm told are not with us in our community anymore because they have passed on at their own hands because they could not get, through suicide, because they could not get the assistance they need. So the acid test, sir, in this debate, the acid test, sir, of this Parliament and this government's commitment to assisting victims is not actually in this bill. We support this bill, we wrote this bill, we came up with the idea for this bill, and this government, and fair enough, is extending it, and I commend them for it. But the acid test as to whether you are truly in support of victims and are committed to it is what you do to assist the most vulnerable. And I would argue children, young men and women, old men and women, who are the victims of sexual abuse and sexual crime who under the last government received the assistance they need and who are denied that assistance under this government for petty bureaucratic reasons or cost-cutting, I say are some of the most vulnerable of our citizenry. And the test for this government is what it does in the days and weeks, although we have had days and weeks and months and now years of this issue not being addressed by that side, what it does and what it proposes to assist those victims, sir. That is one of the acid tests, I think, and whether its support parties stand up tonight if they truly believe in victims' rights and hold their support and hold the government to account, and others outside this place like Sensible Sentencing, who in my view have been somewhat quiet on this issue, sir. So we support this bill, we wrote this bill, we support the extension to it, But I invite members in a very serious way to get up and tell those victims of sexual crime how they will assist